My name's Shane Neville. I've been making games for about 15 years, and over those years I've learned something, specifically over the last couple, that I really wanted to share with everyone, and it is a super simple rule. Originally this started off as a 20-minute talk, and I was talking to Brian. I said, dude, I can do this in 5 minutes because it's such a simple idea. So over the years I've made a wide range of games. Some of the games have been award-winning games, critically acclaimed games that, go down as classics. I've had people come up to me with Shellraiser and Need for Speed Porsche Unleashed and Company of Heroes Opposing Fronts, games that I worked on, and said, that's my favorite game of all time. That's a game that really changed what I did for a career, and it's really exciting working on those games. But I've also worked on some horrendous games, the kind of games that get 30% reviews, or both of these have a 54% review on GameRankings.com. And then, I've worked on some mediocre games, and the mediocre games are ones that, in the right condition, that could be a really good game, but, what we shipped was just kind of mediocre, right? And so I've done some of those. Even my first indie game, Reardent Science Ninja, was one that, ultimately was just kind of mediocre, 70%. And so I looked back on these games, and I said, they all have a lot in common. Some of the games were developed where I was on the ground with the internal development team. In other games, I was an external producer. Some of the games were ports and sequels. Some of the bad games were ports and sequels. Some of them were also original. The games, good and bad, came out on a variety of platforms: PC, console, mobile, handheld. Some of them had huge tens of millions of dollar budgets, and other ones had tens of thousands of dollar budgets. And every single one of the games shipped on time, and I think this is really important. One, because as a producer, I take that as a point of pride that my games always ship on time. But B, none of these games were good because they got more time. It wasn't a situation where it's like, oh man, this game could be good, but if we just gave it 8 more months, it would be amazing. All these games shipped on schedule, and that's really the whole point of this. It's a scheduling talk. I know that sounds boring, but it's a really simple rule that hopefully everyone will understand. So when I look back on these games, I thought, what made the great games different? What really stood out? And I looked at a whole bunch of different things, and 2 specific things on the schedule stuck out at me. The first one was when the core gameplay is defined and playable. And this is kind of when you're working on a game and you're like, hey man, our game's fun. You start putting it in front of people that have never played it before and they don't want to give it back to you and say, oh yeah, that was really nice, thanks. Instead, they keep playing and they're like, no, 5 more minutes, okay? Can I play a little bit more? When you get that core gameplay figured out, you're kind of 50% there. That's usually in most projects, that's when you're 50% content complete. Some of your audio's in there, some of your art, but you're not all the way there. The other key milestone is, 80 to 90% content and feature complete. And for a lot of people, this is when you feel that you're done. Your game is there, you can put it in front of people, you're play testing, and you really feel like, okay, the game is almost complete. These 2 milestones are very specific. So first, let's look at some of the stinkers, right? And basically how I did this schedule-wise, you've got your beginning of production, the midpoint, and the ship point. Now everyone knows that there's a lot of overtime. This factors in overtime, so the midpoint is literally the midpoint in man hours. So if you finaled and worked like 80-hour weeks for the last 2 months, I just kind of stretched that out to, hour-wise. So if you look at the bad games that I worked on, a lot of them weren't even playable until the last 1/6 of development. So you're like, okay, cool, the game is kind of fun, let's put it in front of people and they like it and ship it. Awesome, get that out the door, right? Look how that compares to the well-reviewed games, the critically successful games that I worked on. Is very early on in the cycle, 1/3 of the way through, the core gameplay is defined, you know why the game is fun, you know why it's exciting, people are having fun playing it, and you're ramping up your content super fast. You're getting the game content complete about at the halfway point. When I was working on Company of Heroes Opposing Fronts, we were maybe 20% into the development, and we were having multiplayer games every single Friday with the whole dev team playing different games. Sure, there were a lot of pink boxes shooting pink boxes and things like that, but the game was there and it was playable and we were having fun and we were fixing the fun very, very early on. And that was really, really key. And I teach part-time at Vancouver Film School as a mentor, and I've mentored over 100 different projects, and I look back and I think, hopefully some of the students that worked on these games are in the crowd. These are 4 of my favorite student projects, and their development schedule followed the exact same way. Recently Fragment was one that, I think the graduates just graduated last week. their game was basically done halfway through, and they were like, hey, what should we do? And I said, just make your game better because you're there. You don't need to add anything else. You have to take what you have and polish and tweak and improve it. A very, very simple thing. And all these other projects did it. And what's in our guts and what's in our hearts as game developers is we focus so much on getting the game done. We make it functional. We look at all these checklists that we have. It's like, okay, we need to have 40 different environment models. Okay, environment art is done, check it off, right? And when we get all these things done, all the features are in and everything is functioning and the game is content complete, we want to ship it. But the best games, what they do is they hold on to it. And this isn't about schedule size, right? This isn't, a big schedule makes for a good game. Shellraiser was done, the first prototype was done second week of February and it shipped or second week of January and it shipped in July. It was a very, very short schedule. Great games don't need to have these huge schedules. What matters is finding out the midpoint of your schedule. Where is the middle point? And so how do you find your halfway point? A good sign that your game is halfway to complete of being a great game is you can play it from beginning to end. 90% of the audio and art is in and working. It's not like just recorded and getting edited. It's actually in the game and you can demonstrate it. You're playtesting games with people, not QA, but actual real life people in your playtesting. If you're working on a game and you're not bringing it to the full indie meetup, you are seriously missing out on a huge opportunity to get fresh eyeballs on your game. Really great thing. You as a developer, why your game, know that your game is fun and you understand why. Looking at Nell's talk, and when they figured out what made Mark of the Ninja work, I was one of the early playtesters and I was through some of those early builds of Mark of the Ninja where it wasn't working. Understanding why your game is fun and why it works really helps you improve on that as you go forward and finish the game. You're at your halfway point when you can make a trailer for your game that includes gameplay and not be ashamed of what you're showing people. A lot of people are like, it's not ready for a trailer yet. We still need to add this and we still need to add that. You're not at your halfway point then. And then finally, the game crashes rarely instead of frequently. You can't make a game good if you're constantly worried about not doing something or interacting with a certain part of the game because it crashes your game. And so then after your halfway point, your game is done. Now it's time to make it great. So playtest the game, get tons of users in front of it, revisit your art and audio, re-record, tune the art, tweak the art, revisit it, trash stuff that isn't quite good enough and make it better. On Shellraiser, there was stuff, Nick and I were like, hey, this stuff looks really good. And Jesse's like, no, I'm going to redo it all. And so then Jesse would go in and redo an environment and redo stuff. And the game was way better for it. And that was all stuff that we did in the last half of development. Rebuild your levels and rebuild your levels and rebuild your levels. The first 5 levels in Shellraiser were probably submitted over 100 times each. They were just constantly getting rebuilt and rebuilt and rebuilt and tested. I would resubmit the levels, 3 or 4 times a day because I would build them and test them and then redo them. And that's all in the last half of development. Rebuild your UI. Put it in front of people, see what confuses them. Tear it down, rebuild it. Constantly testing and getting that feedback is really key. And again, playtest, playtest, playtest. If people are getting confused by your game, they don't understand what you intend for them to do, you're not going to reach your audience and give them the experience that they want. So this is really it. This is the 50-50 rule. You spend half of your time making your game, you spend the other half of your time making your game great. And now you guys know. G.I. Joe.